I never told anyone about this until now. I'm keeping my name out of it for reasons that will make sense by the end. I'm 19, and I go to a community college in Southern Virginia. I don't live on campus because there is no campus housing, so I spend a lot of time at the public library near my apartment. The library is old. It was built sometime in the 1940s, and it looks like it. The main floor is fine, but the basement is where they keep the older archive materials and a few public computers that nobody uses. There's a small reading area down there with 2 couches and a coffee table. The lighting is dim and yellowish, and the ceiling tiles are stained in places. It's not a pleasant space, but it's quiet, and that's all I needed. I started going down there in the evenings to study for my anatomy class. The library closes at 9:30, and I would usually get there around 7 and sit on one of the couches with my textbook and notes. Most nights, I was completely alone down there. One night around 8:15, I heard the basement door open at the top of the stairs. Footsteps came down slowly. A man appeared at the bottom of the staircase. He was older, maybe 55 or 60, with gray hair and a brown coat. He didn't look at me. He walked to the far end of the basement past the bookshelves and sat down at one of the public computers. I could hear him typing for a while, then the typing stopped. I glanced over, and he was just sitting there, staring at the screen with his hands in his lap. The screen looked like it was off. I couldn't see any light reflecting on his face. After about 10 minutes, he stood up and walked back toward the stairs. As he passed my couch, he stopped. He turned his head and looked at me. He didn't say anything. His expression was completely flat. He stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably 5 seconds. Then he went upstairs. That was weird, but I told myself maybe he forgot something or was confused. Old people sometimes zone out. I didn't think about it. Too hard. 3 nights later, he was there again. Same routine. Came down, sat at the computer, typed for a while, then went silent. This time, I watched him more carefully from behind my textbook. When the typing stopped, he didn't look at the screen. He turned his chair slightly and looked directly at me. He sat like that for several minutes, just watching me. I pretended not to notice, but my heart was beating faster than it should have been. Eventually, he turned back around and left without looking at me on his way out. This happened 4 more times over the next 2 weeks. Every time the pattern was the same. He would come down and type, and then stop and turn and stare at me. Each time he stared a little longer than the last. The final night I went down there, I got to the basement, and he was already sitting at the computer. That had never happened before. He was always the one who came down after me. But this time, he was already there, waiting in the dark, because the computer screen was off, and the overhead light near that section was turned off too. He was just sitting in the chair in the dark corner of the basement, facing my direction. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. We looked at each other for about 3 seconds. Then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was slow and wide and wrong, like someone who had practiced smiling but didn't understand what it was supposed to mean. I turned around and went back up the stairs. I didn't run, but I wanted to. I walked straight to the front desk and told the librarian there was a man in the basement sitting in the dark. She looked concerned and said no one had signed in to use the basement computers that evening. She called another staff member, and they both went downstairs. They came back a few minutes later and said the basement was empty. The computer he had been sitting at was unplugged. She said it had been unplugged for weeks because it was broken and waiting to be replaced. I stopped going to that library completely. I study at home now with my door locked. I don't know who that man was or how he kept getting into the basement without signing in. But the thing I think about most is that last night. He was already there before me, sitting in the dark like he knew I was coming. That smile told me he had been waiting. My name is Tim J, and I'm 22. I go to a small college in upstate New York, about an hour from the Canadian border. The town has maybe 4,000 people, and in the winter, it gets dark by 4:30 in the afternoon. There's not much to do here besides study and survive the cold. The college library closes at 8 on weeknights, which is way too early when you have exams. So most of us end up at the town's public library, which stays open until 11. It's an old brick building on the edge of downtown with 2 floors and a basement that most people don't even know exists. I found the basement by accident one night when I took a wrong turn looking for the restroom. There was an unmarked door near the back stairwell, and behind it was a narrow set of stairs going down. At the bottom was a small room with old bookshelves lining the walls, and a few wooden tables with green desk lamps. It looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The ceiling was low, and the air smelled like dust and old paper. Nobody was ever down there, and it was perfectly quiet. I started going 3 or 4 nights a week, and it became my spot. The only sign of life was an old security camera in the corner, but the red light on it was never on. For about 2 months, everything was fine. Then one night in late November, I was studying around 9:45 when I heard a sound coming from behind the bookshelves along the back wall. It was a tapping sound, rhythmic and steady, like someone knocking their fingernail against wood. 3 taps, then silence, then 3 more. It repeated over and over. I walked toward the shelves, and the tapping stopped the second I moved. Behind the shelves, there was nothing but a concrete wall. No vents, no pipes, nothing. I went back to my table, and within a minute, the tapping started again. Same rhythm, same location. I told myself it was the building settling or pipes in the walls. I packed up and left without thinking much more about it. The next night, the tapping started again around 9:30. Same rhythm, but this time, after every set of 3 taps, there was a 4th sound, a scratch, like a fingernail being dragged slowly across the wall behind the shelf. The pattern repeated for about 5 minutes. 3 taps, then a long scratch, then it stopped. 2 days later, I brought my friend Dean with me. We studied for about an hour, and I kept waiting for the tapping, but it never came. He said the basement was creepy, but told me it was probably mice or water pipes. The next time I went alone, the tapping came back within 20 minutes. But now, there was something new. Between the taps and scratches, I could hear a faint humming, not mechanical. It sounded human, a low monotone hum, with no melody, just a single sustained note that would last a few seconds and stop. I pulled out my phone and recorded for 3 minutes. When I played it back, the tapping was barely audible, but the humming was clear. It was unmistakably a human voice. That changed everything. I wasn't scared before that moment. I was curious. But hearing it on my phone made it real in a way that just listening in the room didn't. I showed the recording to the librarian the next morning. Her face changed. She didn't look scared exactly. She looked uncomfortable, like I had brought up something she didn't want to discuss. She told me the basement wasn't an official public area, and I probably shouldn't be down there. I asked what was behind the back wall. She said the building had been renovated multiple times, and parts of the original structure were sealed off decades ago. I should have stopped going, but I had exams and couldn't focus anywhere else. The last night I went down there was a Thursday in early December. The tapping started earlier than ever. It was barely 8:30. Same 3 taps, same scratch, same hum. Then the humming got louder, not gradually. It jumped in volume like whoever was making it had moved closer to the wall. I could almost feel the vibration through the table. Then, the green desk lamp on my table flickered and went out. The overhead fluorescent was still on, but the sudden change made me look up. When I looked up, I saw that books on the back shelf had been moved, not fallen, moved. A section that had been standing upright minutes ago were now lying flat, like someone had carefully pushed them over from the other side. The humming stopped. Everything went silent. Then from behind that shelf, I heard a single clear exhale, like someone letting out a breath they had been holding for a long time. It wasn't behind the wall anymore. It sounded like it was on the other side of the bookshelf, maybe 6 feet from where I was sitting. I didn't grab my books or my bag. I walked to the stairs as fast as I could without running. I went up and straight out the front door into the freezing air. I emailed the library the next day, asking about the basement. The reply was short. It said the basement level was closed for maintenance and would not be accessible going forward. It's been 4 months now. I study at the campus library with everyone else. It's crowded and distracting, but I don't care. Sometimes when a room gets really quiet, I catch myself listening for 3 taps. I hate that my brain does that, but I can't stop it. My name is Ethan, and I'm 20 years old. I go to a state university in rural Pennsylvania. I'm a history major, which means I spend way too much time reading and writing papers. Most students use the main campus library, but I never liked it there. Too loud, and too many people treating it like a hangout spot. About a year ago, a friend told me about the public library in the town next to campus. She said the basement level had private study rooms you could use for free. The building was built in the early 1900s, with thick stone walls and narrow windows. The basement had a long hallway with fluorescent lights and 4 small study rooms on the left side. At the end of the hallway was a storage area behind a heavy metal door that was always closed. The rooms were tiny, with just a desk, a chair, and a lamp, no windows. The walls were so thick you couldn't hear anything from upstairs. It was the most focused I had ever been while studying, so I started going almost every night. The library closed at 10, and I would usually show up around 7. Most nights, I was the only person down there. About 3 weeks into this routine, I was studying in the second room with my door cracked open a few inches. It was around 9:15 at night. Then I heard a door open down the hallway, not one of the study rooms. It was heavier. It sounded like the metal door at the end of the hall. I leaned back to look through the crack. The hallway was empty, but I could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate. Not normal walking. It sounded like someone taking one step and waiting several seconds before taking another. The steps got closer. I held my breath. Then they stopped right outside my door. I sat there staring at the crack, waiting. After about 10 seconds, the footsteps moved away back down the hallway. Then I heard the metal door open and close. I packed up and left. I told myself it was a janitor checking rooms before closing. The next night, I went back and closed my door all the way. Around 9:30, when I opened my door to leave, I looked toward the metal door at the end of the hall. It was slightly open, just a few inches, enough to see darkness behind it. Every other time I had been down there, that door was completely shut. I asked the librarian upstairs what was behind it. She said old storage and filing cabinets and archived town records. She said it was supposed to stay locked and looked confused when I told her it was open. 2 nights later, I was studying for a midterm in my usual room with the door closed. Around 8:45, I heard something that made my pen stop. Breathing, not from inside my room, from the other side of the wall that separated my study room from the storage area. It was slow and heavy, like someone pressing their face against the wall and exhaling through their mouth. It went on for at least a full minute before it stopped. I grabbed my phone and held it against the wall with the voice recorder on. 5 minutes of silence. The recording picked up nothing, but I know what I heard. The following week, I went back because I had a paper due and couldn't focus anywhere else. I told my roommate Kyle where I was going and said to call me if I wasn't back by 10:30. I chose the first study room this time because it was farthest from the storage door. I kept my door open so I could see the hallway. At 9 o'clock, the lights flickered, not a quick surge. They dimmed slowly and came back up. A few minutes later, it happened again. Then at 9:22, I know because I checked my phone, the metal door at the end of the hallway opened on its own. I watched it swing inward slowly, revealing nothing but pitch black darkness inside. No footsteps, no breathing. Just the door wide open and a darkness so thick it looked almost solid. Then I heard something that made every hair on my body stand up. A whisper. Faint but clear enough to know it was a voice. I couldn't make out words. Just a low, continuous sound coming from inside that room, like someone standing beyond the doorframe talking under their breath. I stood up and walked into the hallway. I took 2 steps toward the door, and the whispering stopped instantly. Then something moved inside the room. I didn't see what it was. I just saw a shift in the darkness, like a shape pulling back from the doorway. I ran, left my bag, my notes, my jacket, everything. I went up those stairs faster than I have ever moved. The librarian looked startled when I came around the corner. I told her someone was in the storage room. She called the building manager, and he went down with a flashlight. He came back up and said the room was empty and locked from the inside. He said the only key was kept in the front desk drawer. I asked if the door was open when he got there. He said no, closed and locked. I never went back to that basement. I got my bag the next day during daylight with 2 friends waiting at the top of the stairs. Everything was right where I left it. I use the campus library now. It's loud, and I can barely focus, but at least when I hear a noise, I can see where it came from. In that basement, I never once saw the source of anything I heard, and I don't think I was meant to.